Welcome everyone. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about what is going on in terms of crime statistics in the United States of America. Because as you notice, people on the left who are more interested in denying the realities of crime rather than confronting the criminal, holding the criminal accountable, will take any stat, any anecdote, any data point, isolate it, separate it from its overall context, and use that to make the argument that crime is going down without acknowledging the fact that we are at an elevated baseline. However, the problems actually run a lot deeper than that, because it turns out a lot of the data that used to be very reliable is slowly becoming less reliable, and this is exemplified by the recent comparison between the 2022 National Crime Victimization Survey numbers and the FBI's Uniform Crime Report. I'm going to explain to you exactly how this works, exactly who this favors, and exactly how this has given a lot of people on the left the ability to misrepresent crime data in ways that are quite unfortunate if we're actually interested in solving the problems in our nation. Now, before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform. Now, you guys have seen me do a ton of debates on this particular topic, and usually I'm confronted with the same exact tactics, whether it be Emma Vigeland, whether it be Sam Seder, or anybody on the left who is not interested in telling the truth about criminality. One of the things that they'll do is pull up the least reliable, most current, not complete crime statistics, throw that in my face, and say that crime is going down. We saw this with Emma Vigeland when she was saying crime was dropping as of the moment that I was on the podcast in comparison to previous years.
Crime is down in New York City in 2023, by every metric.
Down compared to what?
Down compared to 2021 and
but
2022.
Don't change the subject, right? You accused us of publishing videos we don't publish.
If it's down in compared to 2021, and there was a giant year-over-year increase from 2020 to 2021, then you're talking about something that's down.
It wasn't giant. It was a small bump from the pandemic.
A 47% increase in homicide in the city of New York is not a small bump.
It was,
despite the fact that we didn't have the finalized data for the years that she was talking about, and of course, despite the fact that we had a giant increase in homicide that preceded that, and the drop was from that new baseline. Now, I will pull up the homicide chart so that you guys can see it, and sure, in 2022, we had a 7% decline in homicide, but that was after a 30% increase, which is the greatest year-over-year increase of all time, then a 6% increase on top of that, and then from that elevated baseline, we dropped down 7%. To give you an idea of how ridiculous it is to say that crime is down, or homicide in this particular case is down, based on that, let's work on some maths for you guys out there in the audience, because I know you absolutely love it. Let's say there were 100 murders in a single year. 30% increase means that you have 130 the next year. Then you have a 10% decrease from that new elevated baseline, which means you hack off 13 from 130, you end up with the number of 117, and you can make the argument, if you're on the left and you ignore the fact that we were at 100 previously, that we are now lower than that 130 number, even though we're clearly and obviously elevated from what was the previous norm. This is my whole argument about how crime has trended upward, even if it drops slightly from that upward trend over the past few years, and this is specifically tied to the Black Lives Matter riots. Simple, straightforward, you should be able to understand it, can't make it any more clear than that. Now, by the way, that is a particular trick that more intelligent crime denialists tried to utilize against me, specifically when it comes to homicides, but as we've seen with people like Lance from the Surfs, usually it's not even that sophisticated. Usually what they'll do is combine two different unrelated stats in order to make a similar argument, and of course it falls on its face in a very similar way. You guys will remember the short that I covered. I think I spent 15 minutes on Lance's 60-second video, and in that short, Lance talked about the 30% year-over-year increase in homicide, and then said it was no big deal because in the next year, violent crime, which is a different category that includes homicide, was down 1% by this one measurement that he was able to find.
Are you currently terrified of crime? Well, great news. In the next 60 seconds, I'm going to debunk all of this stuff so you can feel super safe. Well, it is true during the coronavirus pandemic between 2019 and 2020, there was a rise in U.S. homicide rates by about 30%. But since that time, overall violent crime has declined by 1%.
Now, this would be a low IQ denial of crime from somebody like Lance, who doesn't ever know what he's talking about. Because again, you have two different categories that you're combining, and even if they were the same category, a 1% decrease from a new elevated by 30% increase baseline would not be a drop in crime. However, there's a bigger problem afoot. There's a bigger problem amiss in this country, and this has to do with the Uniform Crime Report, how the FBI measures crime, and how it is becoming more and more divergent from the National Crime Victimization Survey, which long-term viewers of this channel know is the more reliable metric of crime. In fact, we use the National Crime Victimization Survey to get around the same proportions as the Uniform Crime Report as kind of a check on the Uniform Crime Report to see what is going on with the reporting versus the actual victimization in this nation. And typically, they're not very divergent. However, something has been happening since the post-Black Lives Matter riots, and that is that police departments around this country are participating less and less in uniform crime reporting, which, by the way, is in fact voluntary. When you have less departments participating in the Uniform Crime Report, you end up with a scenario where the FBI and the statisticians over there have to compensate for more and more missing data each and every year, and this leads to greater variance because statistical models estimating where you think the data might be aren't going to be as accurate as where the actual data would indicate. And this leads us to a chart like this, which should absolutely be devastating to the American public in terms of what we're dealing with in terms of crime in this nation. And this is the National Crime Victimization Survey versus the Uniform Crime Report, comparing the 2021 to 2022 numbers. Now, when we check it out, what you'll realize is that these charts are totally misaligned. According to the Uniform Crime Report, violent crime overall was down by 2%, which, by the way, is not very statistically significant, but okay, whatever. However, according to the National Crime Victimization Survey, it's actually up 75%. In terms of homicide, obviously the victims of homicide aren't filling out surveys, so all we have is the Uniform Crime Report data, which, by the way, is actually trackable to vital statistics that are kept in every state and are to be proven accurate. It is down 7%, and that is good overall. However, if you look at these other categories, what you find is that crime is on a steep rise in all of these serious categories that are covered and covered more accurately by the National Crime Victimization Survey. Rape, according to the Uniform Crime Report, is down 6%, but according to the NCVS, is up 58%. Robbery, which is up 1%, according to the Uniform Crime Report, is actually up 47% according to the National Crime Victimization Survey. And aggravated assault, which is down 2% according to the Uniform Crime Report, is up 104% according to the National Crime Victimization Survey. Now, we need to understand the differences in the reporting methods so that we can understand why there are such differences in the data that is being presented by both of these items. But first and foremost, I want to make it clear, usually there's not this big of a divergence in the year-to-year numbers between the two surveys. The reason this article is written up about this divergence is because it is so extreme, and this is not something that is typical. But essentially, the Uniform Crime Report works as follows. It collects numbers from police departments that are turned over to the FBI on a voluntary basis, and this only covers crimes that are reported to the police, which makes sense. If the police have the data, they can turn it over to the FBI. If they don't have the data, they can't turn it over to the FBI. So, one of the things that is leading to the disparity between the Uniform Crime Report and the National Crime Victimization Survey is that less crimes are being reported to the police in 2022 than they were in 2021, which, by the way, we have the numbers on that, and it turns out that 52% of serious violent crimes were reported to the police in 2021, and only 48% in 2022, which is a relative decline of nearly 8%. The decline in reporting crimes to the police was particularly large in aggravated assault, which, by the way, has the greatest disparity on the chart, which fell from 61% in 2021 to 50% in 2022, which is a relative decline of 18%. So according to the data that is being presented to us, people are less likely to report violent crimes to the police, and specifically aggravated assault seems like something that is not worth people's time in order to report to the police, and this is due to a number of factors. First and foremost, officers are short-staffed. We've done a number of stories on this channel where the new way that you're supposed to report crime to the police is via email, via online survey, because they just don't have the officers to send out into the field in order to collect those reports. Also, we have issues with response times being low. So if you call 911 in order to report a fight or some kind of disturbance or whatever, and the police show up an hour late or 2 hours late, and the whole incident is gone, and you basically left because there was no point in sticking around for 2 hours of your life, that does not get reported. Now, when people are aware of the fact that the police don't make arrests, when they're aware of the fact that the response times are incredibly low, this leads to distrust between the general population and the police department, and this can also lead to less calling of the police, less reporting of criminality, and all of that. And again, this is expressly shown to us in the National Crime Victimization Survey numbers when you ask people directly if they're being victimized versus what is being reported directly to the cops. And interestingly, for those of you who are thinking that maybe the perception of racism is what is driving down the reporting, that turns out to not be the case. It turns out that black victims are no less likely to report a crime committed against them to the police than white victims. Now, by contrast, the way the National Crime Victimization Survey works is they send out these surveys directly to about 150,000 households across the United States of America, and they survey people within that household aged 12 and up, and they ask them about their victimization. They also ask them about whether or not they reported their crime to the police, so we can get something that is a more accurate measure of crime. And by the way, there are local versions of victimization surveys that go out all the time within your local municipality, and people also interview this enormous and representative sample of people within the United States of America in order to get the best, most accurate gauge of where criminality is at in the United States of America. And by the way, the National Crime Victimization Survey is considered the gold standard of crime victimization surveys because of how thorough it is. It also has in-person interviews as a component to it.
So you're suggesting that this is that crime's not actually dropping, that it's more
no,
like
it dropped.
mirage.
It happened, and I'm glad that it happened. I'll wait for the completed data, the victimization surveys at the end of the year. But yeah, I'm glad that it's happening, of course.
This is why, by the way, in a debate or conversation where somebody is citing a preliminary decline in crime numbers, to me, I always say we'll wait for the victimization surveys, because something going up or down 1 to 2% in a country this big may be something that's completely statistically insignificant, and whenever there's something that close, I usually want to wait on the victimization survey in order to give us more clarity on what's actually going on. But the thing is, the victimization surveys take way longer than the uniform crime reports, so what ended up happening was all the information about the supposed decline in crime in 2022 was out there in the public. People were looking at it, they were utilizing it, not analyzing the fact that there may be problems with this data. And then now, when we have the victimization surveys, all of those people just ignore that because they already got their talking points out, which is crime is on the decline, even if the numbers that they're pointing to are slight declines after dramatic increases, as we talked about in the open of this video. Now, we are really good at measuring homicide stats because, again, you have a dead body. It's kind of undeniable whether or not somebody was killed by another human being in this country. So the homicide stats being down 7%, even though that's against an elevated baseline, are real. That is something true, and that is a decline that we can point to that's actually happening. However, the victimization surveys show us that other crimes are on the rise, they're not falling. But also, like I said, we're seeing a decline in the number of agencies reporting data to the FBI in the first place, and that also is a problem. Get a load of this chart, which shows the great increase in the police departments no longer submitting their data to the feds for analysis in the uniform crime Crime Report, post the year 2020, post the Black Lives Matter riots, and post all of these criminal justice reforms which seek to aid the criminal and obfuscate the fact that they're doing that. We had a significant jump to over 7,000 law enforcement agencies no longer sharing the data. This means that according to what the FBI has to do, they have to weight more and more non-compliant agencies. And by the way, it's not like all of these law enforcement agencies are equal in size or even proportional. The NYPD is included in that 7,000 not sharing data with the FBI at this moment for the Uniform Crime Reports. And that is the largest police department on planet Earth, pure police department, not counting military security like they have in China that also function as police. They have something like 40,000 sworn officers in the NYPD, which I believe is bigger than the next 5 departments combined in this country. So one of these departments not sharing data, the LAPD, by the way, also in there, can be more significant than 20 departments actually sharing data in terms of the FBI's reporting. And again, they have to use more and more statistical models, more and more data tricks in order to try to close those gaps, and that is producing less and less accurate results right here. Now, the FBI or the feds are trying to go with the National Incident Reporting Database in order to compensate for this, but obviously they're still putting out these UCRs, and these are still being cited when convenient by the left-wing media, despite the fact that we have clear and obvious indicators that they're becoming less accurate, not more accurate, that they're becoming more divergent from the victimization surveys, not narrowing with the victimization surveys. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this, the reason I'm explaining to you these different data collection methods, is so that you can understand the great answer to this question, which is crime still going up post 2021 in 2022 and 2023? And of course, the answer to that question is likely, but we're not 100% sure. The only thing that we seem to be sure of is that murder is slightly going down, although we're still at an elevated baseline. However, the data is actually quite conflicting, and until something comes out to reconcile that, it looks like we're going to hide in the ambiguity, and when the left is able to do that, they're going to push more and more criminal justice reforms. Now, I believe, and I think the history shows out, that the National Crime Victimization Survey is more accurate than the Uniform Crime Reports, so I think crime is on the rise in all of these major categories as represented by the data. And another reason why I believe this to be true, other than the fact that the Uniform Crime Report has historically not been as accurate as the victimization surveys, is because there's incentives in these law enforcement departments to bring down the crime numbers in their areas in order to help their political leadership that just don't exist in the victimization surveys. Now, I want to open up the floor to you guys out there in the audience. I want to know what you guys think about the disparity in the crime data, if you understand where I'm coming from, or if you think I need to do 27 more videos explaining the basic statistical variances and the different ways that we measure crime, and why I argue against people like Sam Cedar, like Emma Vigeland, like any of these lefties in the way that I do whenever they bring up preliminary numbers that are not verified and or backed up by the victimization surveys. Do you get it now? Do you understand? Let me know down in the comments below. If you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the mess that is our current crime data. Till next time.